We are seeing a handful of Republicans, Rooney, Hurd, Romney, and a little bit of Lindsey Graham speaking out-ish against the president's actions. Is something bigger happening behind the scenes, or is this just a couple of people who, for the most part, are retiring?
I don't think there's anything really big happening behind the scenes yet. I think people are being a little bit more cautious. Certainly there is fatigue with having to defend the president. I think the Doral decision was sort of the last straw on that front, where you had more people, while not publicly bucking, privately sending very strong messages to the White House that we're not doing this anymore. We're not going to go out here on the Sunday shows and every day on TV to say how, this is a good thing you're hosting the G7 at Doral. So there is beginning to be some pushback, Stephanie. But I need a little bit more than what I've seen. I need declarative statements and declarative sentences that really make it very clear that the president has gone too far, and that Republicans in the Senate and the House, and the Senate especially, are prepared to take whatever steps necessary to rein him in.
You listening, GOP? Michael Steele just said to you he's going to need a little more than what you're doing. Congressman Israel McMulvaney is saying now his comments are being taken out of context. Anyone can sit and watch those 40 minutes. It's not being taken out of context. But can Democrats use Mick Mulvaney's statements from last week and use them for their questioning this week around the impeachment inquiry?
Oh, there's no question. And in fact, President Trump, Mick Mulvaney have essentially become cooperating witnesses for Democrats. Every time they open up their mouth, they bolster a case either for obstruction or something else. But Stephanie, if I may, I want to pick up on something that Michael said. He's right about needing to see more. You mentioned Congressman Will Hurd, who has said that who's been critical of the president. You mentioned Congressman Rooney, who has been critical. You mentioned Mitt Romney. Hurd and Rooney, their profiles and courage, who've decided not to run for re-election. Mitt Romney, I'm glad he said what he said, but he's got a few more years before he's running for re-election. So, Michael, I agree with you. We need to see more. We need to see more Republicans who are going to run for re-election, who are willing to distance themselves from the president. And one more thing, I talked to some of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle over the weekend. Everything that we see from here on in is about whipping against an impeachment vote. The Republicans need to reduce the number of House Republicans who will vote for impeachment. There's a direct corollary between that and the number of Senate Republicans who will vote on impeachment. These two things are connected. Everything that is happening is about making it easier for House Republicans to vote against impeachment, controlling the numbers in the Senate.
All right. It sounds like Devo's Whip It is about to make a big comeback. Jonathan, let's talk about Mick Mulvaney, the decision to no longer host G7 at the Doral. I want to share what he said over the weekend.
At the end of the day, he still considers himself to be in the hospitality business, and he saw an opportunity to take the biggest leaders from around the world, and he wanted to put on the absolute best show, the best visit that he possibly could, and he was very comfortable doing that at Doral. And I think we were all surprised at the level of pushback. I think it's the right decision to change. We'll have to find someplace else, and my guess is we'll find someplace else that the media won't like either for another reason.
I just have to pick up. You say he considers himself in the hospitality business. He's the president of the United States.
Yeah.
Jonathan, unpack this for us, because when the president tweeted about it yesterday, again, he said, the media isn't mentioning that I'm not profiting. We have to make this clear. This is not about a profit or the Trump company being in the green. This is about losing less money. The month of June is already a sunk cost, where no one is hosting a conference in the state of Florida, and where the Trump organization would lose a ton of money that month. By hosting the G7, they would lose a whole lot less money. So the president and Mick Mulvaney are being disingenuous when they say, we're not talking profitability. This isn't about profitability. This is about what it does for his organization during a month. And remember, they would be using the property for months leading up to it. A former administration official said to me, forget about those 2 weeks, 50 to 100 nights would be taken in preparation for the event.
Stephanie, I really hate to agree with you completely on your own show, but I'm going to do that. I think you're absolutely right. The emoluments clause of the Constitution is very clear. It's unmistakable. The President of the United States and other officials are not allowed to benefit from gifts or from money from foreign states. And that's what the president was doing here, or was intending to do here, with locating the G7 at Doral. And whether it's something that is at a profit to him or something that is simply at a benefit to him, whether he owes other states in the future or not, the whole idea here is that he shouldn't be in a position where others are giving him money, where other states who might be able to influence him are responsible for making his bottom line better, because of course that could lead to improper influence in policy making. It's very clear, it's been clear since the Constitution was written, it's what our founding fathers worried about, and ultimately Republicans pushed back on him on Capitol Hill. This wasn't just Democrats pushing back on him, this certainly wasn't the media pushing back on him. Republicans on Capitol Hill looked at this and they said, this is a clear violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution.
Let's not forget capital improvements. Anything that would be done to the resort would have a lasting positive impact on the resort and the Trump Organization going forward. He gave us no information around who is going to be paying for that. Mr. Steele, the Wall Street Journal reporting that Mick Mulvaney was surprised about the pushback. How is that possible?
How's that he was surprised by the pushback?
Yes.
Well, simply because they live in a bubble. They live in a bubble in which there's only one voice that's circulating throughout their head, and that's Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is telling them, this is the world in which we live, and this is how it's going to be. So when they get that's why the pushback is so important, Stephanie. That's why the clarity is so important, to get them out of this Trump bubble that they find themselves in.
But Michael,
whether, Mulvaney or anyone else.
Mick Mulvaney didn't know President Trump 3 or 4 years ago. Common sense, rationale would tell you, here's the 7 reasons why this doesn't make sense. I spoke to a former administration official last night who said they went to their go-to playbook, distract, but they weren't paying attention to what they were actually putting in front of the American people.
Well, look, the idea is really distract. And it's a lot of what's being put in front of the American people is coming from one person. Look, Mulvaney and others are not sitting around the West Wing thinking this stuff up. They're not sitting there calculating the next move. The only person who's probably close to doing that is Steve Miller, and that's on the immigration front. And that's because, again, that's in lockstep with Trump's thinking. Everyone else is playing, as we saw with Mulvaney this week, defense, catch up, explanation. They're the ones who are going out trying to justify a decision that's not really a decision so much as it is, this is what I want to do. This is their reality. And when the president, Mulvaney is so funny. He's like, yeah, we went through a list of 10 places to host the G7. Then we narrowed it down to 4 and decided on Doral. Really? That's how that went. So we see how this plays out.
He didn't give us the list of 10 places or 4 places, or give us
there's
any
only
idea.
One.
Just gave us the one in Florida in the month of June.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.